Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 38. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And for this edition of the podcast series, I am on my travels. We're not in the normal place where we would record the 100 objects and the histories of Northamptonshire that follow from them. Instead, I've come to the capital of London, and that is because my guest works here and we are in a very rarefied and legal area. Hello, welcome to the podcast series. Tell me who you are and tell me what the object is that we're going to be discussing here.
I'm Sarah Cockerell. I'm a lawyer, currently working as a judge. I'm also a historian, and I have written a biography of Eleanor of Castile, who was the first queen of Edward I, the great and terrible king, England's greatest medieval king. The object links to them and their love story. It is a part of Northampton's very own Eleanor Cross.
We are looking out from the windows of your office onto history, onto the architecture of history, and it's a historical piece of architecture which is the object for this particular podcast. But as you say, it evidences and it instances a fantastic love story long before Shakespeare ever got anywhere near Romeo and Juliet.
Yes. What we can see out back of where we're sitting is the Public Record Office, or used to be the Public Record Office, which was, of course, designed in sort of Gothic style, which is a style which was in part inspired by this very object that we're talking about today. Edward I was the son of Henry III of England. Henry III, not one of our greatest and most successful kings. He needed to have his French lands, in particular his Gascon lands, made safe by a good marriage alliance. And so he arranged a wedding between his son Edward and the half-sister of the King of Castile. That meant that the Spanish border would be safe. And so Edward and Eleanor were married when they were very young indeed. Edward was sent over there aged 14. Eleanor was just about to turn 13 when they met and married within a few days.
So was this marriage a kind of political, not a marriage of convenience, but of course it made things politically convenient. Was it that kind of a thing, or were they genuinely attracted to each other?
They didn't meet until a few days before the wedding. But it was one of those occasions when a definitely arranged, deeply politically convenient marriage actually turned into a genuine love story. The pair of them were very lucky in that they were very close in age. They turned out to be very close indeed in interests. And from a very early stage, they formed an incredibly strong bond. And then throughout a marriage which went on for 36 years, they very, very rarely spent a night apart, except in a particularly difficult point when there was a civil war in England and both of them were separately taken prisoner. But after that, and certainly throughout his reign, they travelled together, they did everything together, and they were devoted. So
the point about them being virtually inseparable, that is actually of historical fact. These two were very much celebrities to the country.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. And one of the things that they did so well, which his father had not done so well, was they travelled the country together. And part of that was because Eleanor was very keen in acquiring properties to make money because the crown was insolvent. And she had properties around the country, a lot of them actually near Northampton. But they travelled together. She inspected her lands. He held meetings, met local people. And you actually do have stories of ordinary local people coming out and giving her a loaf of bread or something, because they were celebrities, they were exciting people to have around, and they were very much valued.
So being brought together, they actually created a circle. They were the whole from two halves.
Yes, there was no Team Edward or Team Eleanor. They were entirely a cooperating set of forces.
You mentioned the length of their marriage together. In terms of the context of a lifetime from then, 36 years was a long, long time.
Yes, it was. Sadly, Eleanor died quite young. She didn't even make it to 50, in part because of the physically very hard life she had. She had at least 15 children during the course of their marriage. She averaged about a baby once every 18 months throughout the course of their marriage. And they travelled a huge amount, not just in England, internationally. They went on crusade, they went to Spain, they went to France, they went to Sicily, all sorts. Eleanor never took an overt role in governance, but she played a very, very significant backstage role. And over the course of that, and working incredibly hard as well at managing her property empire, she, I'm afraid, basically worked herself to death. But it was a long marriage and a very, very successful and happy marriage.
Her death, therefore, must have been not only a hammer blow to the nation in terms of how the monarchy was being observed and valued, but also for Edward. Inseparable since they had been together, only together a few days before marriage. What was the effect on Edward I?
Yes, I mean, it was devastating. They had been best friends and lovers since they were in their teens. It was that sort of marriage. And throughout their marriage, if they were apart for a day or so, they would write to each other at least once a day. They would send each other presents. So for him, he had known that she was ill, because you can trace the journey up north that year, going slower and slower and slower. She knew she was dying. He knew she was dying, but it would still have fallen on him as a hammer blow when she finally left him. They had planned for it. They had planned a tomb image for her at Westminster Abbey. Nobody knows quite whether the idea of the crosses was hers or his. There was an example of something similar being done in France, but what was decided to be done was to take Eleanor's body back to London for this beautiful funeral and burial in Westminster Abbey. And every place that the cortege stopped on the way, they would raise a cross in memory of her. And not just a cross which was a masterpiece of design, a cross which had images of Eleanor, and a cross which had decoration which signified things about her, about him, about their relationship. And the Northampton Cross is one of those. And to my mind, I never know whether I prefer Geddington or Northampton, but I think in many ways Northampton is my favourite.
Sari, you've talked about the effect on Edward of losing Eleanor, his wife. After her death, he was generous in a very personal way to those that were very close to her. What is that story?
It's such a lovely story. I really like telling this one. Throughout their marriage, they had to observe the rules of the church as to when you could sleep together. And so in Lent, married couples were not allowed to have sex. And so every year, although they would be in the same household, Eleanor and Edward would have a whole period of time where they couldn't be in the same bed. And at the end of it, every single year, her ladies would not let him back into her bed until he paid them a large sum of money. And they would kind of grab hold of him and say, nope, until he handed over the money. The year after Eleanor died, Edward sought out her ladies and gave them the usual sum of money because he was so missing having her there, having that part of their domestic life. And he wanted to memorialise the joy that they had had in the joke, in the getting back into bed together.
Of course, our county, we not only had the Queen Eleanor Crosses, we still have the Queen Eleanor Crosses. We're the only county that has more than one. The Northampton one has been subject to some renovation and restoration work, and I know somebody very dear to your heart was very involved in getting that work done. We were seriously in danger of losing the Queen Eleanor Cross altogether.
Absolutely. The Northampton Cross has been restored a number of times over the years, sometimes sensitively and sometimes not. A few years back, it was in a very bad way. There are some terrible pictures of plants growing out of crevices. You could see cracks getting bigger and bigger. One of the great local historians of Northampton, Mike Ingram, could see this, and he could not stand to see this happening. And he started a campaign. We had a Facebook page which he ran, and he conducted all sorts of interviews, and he harassed the local council, the parish council. Everybody was trying to say it should be somebody else looking after it because it was plainly going to be a very expensive thing to do. But Mike would not let people dodge accountability, and in the end got a wonderful restoration, a wonderful sensitive restoration job done. And the fact that the Northampton Cross looks as it does today is, I think, a real tribute to Mike.
Clearly we couldn't have the Queen Eleanor Cross inside the Northampton Museum for the exhibition, but a small part of it is there. What is this object and where is it from?
Yes, so first of all, I need to explain a bit about the cross. Was designed to be very tall. It goes in stages. At the bottom, there are effectively kind of there's a relatively plain structure with gabling and with some decoration. As it goes up, you then have the next stage, which has statues of Eleanor in various different modes, happy or about to walk into a room or looking distinctly fierce. And then above that, there are sort of pointed gables with really elaborate decoration. And right at the top, a sort of finial almost to one of those, is a piece of that, the original, removed on one of the previous restorations, is the object in question.
You wrote the book of Eleanor of Castile. You are a working woman. She was a working woman. What is your take on the woman herself and the way she has now been immortalised through the work of Edward and each of the stopping off points on this journey?
Yes, well, I make no secret of the fact that I regard Eleanor as a major source of inspiration. I mean, she was a phenomenal woman, incredibly vibrant, incredibly driven, incredibly good company. It's something that I think, the kind of woman that many of us would love to be. Whenever I have difficulties and I need to be tougher on myself, I find myself saying, what would Eleanor do? She is an amazing woman. Edward wanted to memorialise her, I think, in this very personal way, because of the very many different inspirational facets she had. The earlier crosses that had been done in France for Louis IX just showed one pose, just showed him as a king, whereas Eleanor's crosses show her as a queen, as an interesting person, as a businesswoman. They show her love of books. The Eleanor Cross, of course, has a little book set into the part of the lower part of it. So she was a woman who supported her husband, was a great queen as a queen, was an enormously successful businesswoman, and was a great friend and a wonderful wife.
No exhibition could tell the definitive story of a county. We are, to a degree, scratching the surface with all of the objects in the exhibition. Why should this one be in the exhibition now, Sarah?
It shows a moment in time where you see a change in design which does affect the way this country looks now, because as I mentioned, the style which we see in the crosses then goes on to inspire that Victorian Gothic, because it's an inspiration for the Albert Memorial and for so much other of the Victorian Gothic style, which really is very characteristic of this country now. But it also speaks to the centrality of Northampton, because Northampton at this stage in history was absolutely critical to England's political life. Eleanor had a lot of properties in Northampton because Northampton was a really important place where you could not avoid stopping off. And when you look at all the medieval monarchs, you see them basing themselves in Northampton, calling meetings in Northampton, doing business from Northampton. And so this importance given to having two crosses in Northamptonshire and this beautiful one in Northampton itself shows that centrality. It also, of course, the cross itself goes on to be important in later history. It's a stopping off point it's a key feature in both the Battle of Northampton and the Battle of Edgecote, I think. So you have in the Wars of the Roses two instances where it is kind of embedded in the story. So it goes very much to sort of position Northampton as that vitally important place within the country.
And a piece of architecture which overlooks where the Battle of Northampton was played out.
Absolutely. And indeed, the Battle of Northampton was observed, I think, by the papal envoy from the steps of the Eleanor Cross. And it's possible even that Warwick executed the Herberts on the steps of the Eleanor Cross after Edgecote.
It is the most astonishing story of two individuals immortalised forever through their love for each other, which we can all look on and take some pride in as well. Sarah, it's been lovely to hear you tell the story of Eleanor and Edward as well. Thank you for doing so.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.